Hey everybody, thanks for clicking on my video. If you're new to my channel, if you've never watched any of my videos before, please consider subscribing if you like concrete flatwork. We specialize in all types of concrete flatwork, from pouring garage floors like this to house floors, basement floors, stamped concrete, concrete pool decks, all types of patios, just a lot of concrete flatwork. That's all we do. We don't do the foundation walls. That's done by another company. We're actually working for those guys today, so this is their job. They sub out the floor to us. So walls, they tell us is, hey Mike, we got a 24 by 24 garage floor, in whatever town it's in. Here's the specs. We just need you to lay poly. We're going to use fiber mesh in the concrete. We got a 3,500 PSI concrete. We're using water reducer. So those are the types of things I get when I work for my normal subcontractors that hire us to do all kinds of concrete floors. So they just hire me basically for labor to come here and pour, finish the concrete, and then to saw the expansion joints after we get done power troweling today. Now another thing we're going to talk about is you're going to get to see like our method for pouring. We'll probably do it a little bit different than most everybody else. One thing we do different is probably we use water reducer so we can increase the slump of the concrete without hurting the strength. That's what water reducer is for when it's put in the mix. So that's number one for you slump police out there. And then for the rebar and the wire mesh kind of police, the reason there's no rebar and there's no wire mesh in here is because that just wasn't on the spec. That's not the way the engineer designed it. They just designed it for fiber mesh in the concrete, so that's why we're only using fiber mesh for reinforcement. Now when you pour concrete inside a concrete wall like this, inside a foundation, like the concrete floor is not going to go anywhere. It's not going to just crack all up and break because there's no wire or rebar in there. The wire and rebar do help hold it together if it does crack, but really there's a few key reasons as to why our concrete floors just don't crack up and break up because of that type of reinforcement. Number one is the subgrade. When the guys come in and they backfill and they do the compaction, they put the gravel inside here and they compact it and lift. So every 6 inches or 8 inches they put in, maybe even a foot, they compact it down so it's really firm, really hard. That way the concrete's not going to settle. So it's not going to crack up by settling. And then when we pour the concrete like this, we order the right mix design, number one. We have a very low water to cement ratio because we're using the water reducer. So the concrete's going to be very strong. It's going to cure as it's designed to cure. So it's going to have very little shrinkage. And then we saw cut joints in it. So if the concrete does want to shrink and crack as it cures, 99 times out of 100 it cracks in the saw cut like it's supposed to. That's what the saw cut is for. So it's not going to break all up. I get a lot of comments on here about, oh, that concrete's not going to be any good because it doesn't have rebar in it. That's just a total myth. Because it doesn't have wire mesh in it, that's a total myth. If it's been spec'd for it, if the engineer wants it in here or the architect, then we put it in. If it's not, then we do it the way we're told to do it. And a lot of the floors we pour here inside foundations are done just like this. So basically, I'll call up and I'll order the concrete for such and such a day. We'll hope it doesn't rain. If it rains or a chance of rain, we usually cancel and reschedule. But if it's a nice day like today, the concrete shows up at 6 a.m., at 6:30 a.m., whatever time we decide on. And then he mixes up. I tell him the yardage, obviously. He mixes up, gets it to the slump we want, and then we start pouring. And we usually like to pour out the concrete truck, most of it, first before we start doing the screeding. What's going to be really cool here is you're going to see how we screed concrete like the old-fashioned way, like how I was taught years ago. We still use that method and it still works really good. Honestly, I think it's one of the best methods for screeding concrete that I've seen. And I've watched a lot of other videos, on the internet. But anyway, that's just my preference. It's the way I was taught. It's the way I teach my guys. And then there's another way we do it that you can see by watching some of our other videos using a power screed or a vibrating screed, but we're not going to use that today. Now this garage is 24 by 24. It's a 2-bay garage. we come in, you know, either early this morning, we'll shoot our grades on it and put the poly down, or we'll show up a day or two in advance and do that stuff. We set up a laser, we shoot a chalk line around the inside perimeter of the foundation. We snap like a blue chalk line on there, or maybe a red chalk line. We're using the laser, and that slopes 2 inches, so the floor is 2 inches higher in the back than it is in the front. It slopes 2 inches towards the front here. A lot of the garage floors we do in Maine are like that. And then that's basically just so if, you know, you drive in and it's raining, or you drive in the winter and the snow melts off your car, it's going to tend to want to go towards the garage doors and not towards the back wall if the floor is flat, or just puddle up in the middle, which is kind of a pain. And I've never heard of anybody complaining about the garage doors freezing to the concrete floor because of that. So that's definitely a myth too. And my garage floor is like that. And I got a 3-bay garage, non-heated, slope to the front. It does stay warm enough usually inside the garage that snow melts off it and the water kind of drips towards the door, runs out the door, but the doors never froze. You know, and we have winter here from December to March here. We have freezing temperatures. So Darren's kind of mag floating the edges around the perimeter, and Luke's kind of mag floating there up by the garage doors. We set the garage door form boards to grade, so we'll shoot marks on the outside of the foundation, and then we'll tap con those forms right onto the concrete, hold them in place, and we'll backfill them with some dirt. Sometimes we'll even put some metal pins in behind them. And then this is how we pour the concrete. You know, we pour out, 90 some odd % of the concrete, because, we know how much time we got to work with it, how much working time we got with it. And it takes us usually just pouring it out of the chute and getting it kind of rough graded out like we do right now. Usually is one of the longest parts of doing this. As you'll see here, screeding isn't going to take us very long because of how we do it, and really just how good Darren and Luke are at screeding concrete. Now Eric has the fluorescent kind of green shirt on. He can screed concrete the same way, and so can I. So there's 4 of us here who can all pick up that straight edge. We call it a straight edge, we call it a rod, we call it a screed. Let me know what your favorite term is for that, but basically it's a magnesium straight edge. It's not a 2x4, it's made out of magnesium. It's really lightweight. I've had that same one. I've had that for years. I mean, you can use that over and over again if you use it good. But so we're kind of just striking off the concrete based on the level that we need it at. And I shot the level in the middle. I made what we call a wet pad in the middle using the laser. So that wet pad in the middle matches the middle of the garage on the edges, so it all evenly slopes out to the front. Now Darren is on the right of the screed, Luke's on the left, and they're called what we call kick screeding. So as they screed the concrete, like we like to keep the screed itself, the rod slightly tipped backwards. We don't want to cut the concrete. That's not how we screed. We keep it slightly tipped backwards. You can see kind of the motion, kind of the flow they're using. And as they move backwards, they take their foot that they lift out of the concrete and they slightly kick a little bit of concrete in where they just pulled their foot out, and that fills in their foot tracks as they move backwards. And you can see they just screed an area 12 by 12, 144 square feet in literally about 30 seconds maybe. That's how fast that is with 2 guys. And there's really, when 2 guys get good at it like they are, that doesn't take much effort when the slump is right, and then especially when you got 2 guys raking behind them that know what they're doing. The key for the 2 guys raking right here is just making sure they have enough concrete behind them so they don't have to stop like that. Just keep pushing it up. And the guys that are rodding the concrete, they like it when it's just a little bit high, and they can just keep pulling back a little bit of that high as they pull it backwards right here. They don't want to get it low. That causes them to stop. And then if it gets too high, if it gets way too high, the guys raking it need to pull that back so it doesn't end up being too high. You can see, I see this bay right here that I'm in right in front of you is a little bit low in concrete, so I'm getting ahead of the game a little bit and filling that back in before Darren and Luke come over here. Trying to get that magged out raked out, get it filled in. So if anything, we want the concrete just to be a little bit high. When we have it low, then we got to pull the chute back in, run a little bit more, pull it around. That just slows us down. And one thing we don't like is to be slowed down. Now, we're definitely not hurrying here. This is our normal pace. I left this in real time. This is exactly about how long it takes us to pour a garage, screed it, and then bull float it. The only thing I might have cut out a minute or two of just some dead areas in the video when we actually weren't doing anything for whatever reason. We were either talking or something. So 2 guys mag floating the edges. I'm right behind them. That's what I call, I'm kind of tuning in the concrete. I'm trying to get it as close to grade, finished grade as I can with the rake without getting it low. So when the guys grab the screed and they come down, there's no stopping. They just keep going until they run out of basically what we call a pad, a grade pad to go by. And then one other little tip or one other little trick that we do is we always strike off the garage doors just in case, lumber, you never know with lumber. Usually most of our lumber is pretty straight. That's why we have it. If it's not, then we usually throw it out or use it for scrap or something. But we always check the garage doors based off the chalk line that we shot with a laser. So we'll strike that off right there, even after we mag float it to the top of the form. And then we'll use that to screed by. That way, if there is a little dip or a little hump in that form board, the concrete floor is not going to show that later on when the concrete hardens up and we're power troweling it. In most cases, our forms are good though. They're pretty straight and level across there. So again, we're both going at the same pace. Some guys like to have a little bit longer pull, or what we call a stroke, on the screed than we do. We kind of like the short ones like that, 6 to 8 inches, where we score. Our ends are both scoring, and then we just set back and just keep going. And again, that's about a 12 by 12 area we're doing, and that's got to be under 30 seconds right there. We got that down without stopping. So the screeding part of the concrete floor is really probably the fastest for us. So actually dumping the concrete out of the chute and then coming back after we get the concrete screeded and bull floated, those 2 things, before and after, I usually take the longest. Now, another way we screed is with a vibrating screed, and if you want to see some of those videos, subscribe. Check out some of my videos where we're doing a little bit bigger floors maybe, or if it's a house floor, we use a power screed a lot. And there's a little tip, and there's some tips and techniques that we do for that in order to get the concrete really flat and level. You can learn how to do that there, but if you really want to learn a lot of my secrets, a lot of my training, you can join the Concrete Underground, my private training, which there's a link for that down in the description of the video where there's a little down arrow that says show more. Click on that and a lot of my links show up. And the Concrete Underground, plus some of my other training courses are in there, like epoxy coatings and concrete slabs and stuff like that. That stuff's down there if you want to learn how to do all that. But right now we're teaching, like the guy bull floating there is young Luke, we're teaching him how to do this stuff. So we're kind of right in the middle of training a new guy or a young guy how to bull float, how to rake and puddle the concrete. And then once he gets some of that down, he'll learn how to screed, learn how to mag the edges like we do, because those are kind of some really fine technical things that if you don't do that right, then your concrete floor is going to have a hump or a dip in it that you want to make sure it doesn't. I'm just explaining to him, how I do it, my method for doing it, and why I do certain things the way I do it that I've learned over the years that help improve the pouring and finishing and the power troweling of the concrete. That all matters, when you pour concrete like this. There's certain things you can do that help the finishing aspects of the process too. You can see Luke's going a little bit slower than normal because he's just learning. So my if I was pushing that bull float down and back, I'd probably be going at a speed about twice as fast as he is. Still relatively slow, but probably about twice as fast as he is. You can see he's pushing. When he pushes that down and back, there's no dips underneath the bull float. Both ends of the bull float are touching, scoring. So that means the concrete's really nice and flat right there. There's no humps right there. They don't have to come back. None of us have to come back and throw concrete in under the bull float to fill in low areas. Man, I see that a lot on the internet, some of these videos. That means, you know, when you can push it down and pull it back like that in one stroke and have it that smooth, that means your floor is, the screeded part of the floor is really, really flat. Even though this does slope 2 inches from back to front, and that 4 feet right there, that's the width of the bull float. That area is really nicely screeded. So for you guys watching that have made it this far in the video, I mean, you're about 3/4, maybe a little over 3/4 of the way through the video. Number one, I appreciate you watching this long. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. That really helps the channel out a lot. But let me know if, like, what's different with your method. If you guys pour concrete at all, or even if you have poured concrete at all, you know, let me know down in the comments if you, when the concrete truck shows up, do you dump out as much as we do, or do you only do a small section at a time? How do you establish your grades? Do you use a laser like we do, or do you do it differently? Do you screed the concrete differently? Like, what's your method? Do you use a 2x4? Do you actually have a magnesium screed, or do you have some other way of doing it? Do you wet screed off the concrete like we do, or do you kind of set a 2x4? And then as far as bull floating down here, do your methods different when you bull float? Now because we screed so flat, like, we don't always cross 90 degrees bull float the way we screed. We can basically go any way we want, whatever's easiest, as long as there's nothing in the way, you know, behind the bull float, trees or a fence or vehicles or anything like that. It doesn't matter which way we screed because of the way, it doesn't matter which way we bull float because of the way we screed. Some guys, they like to go, they like to bull float 90 degrees the direction of the way they screeded the concrete, and that helps flatten it out a little bit. Like, we don't have to worry about that. Concrete's already flat before we even bull float. So let me know if you do it a little differently, or if you always try to go 90 degrees with the bull float. And then, you know, basically when we pour, we'll do 1 or 2 of these jobs a day, depending on how many or what on the list gets ready, and then how much concrete we can actually get. Because this will be, you know, if we're starting pour here at 6 in the morning, you see how long the video is. It doesn't take us long to pour a floor like this, and it only takes really one guy to finish the power trowel. You know, as long as we have the crane on the back of the pickup truck to lower the power trowel, then pick it back up after, we don't need to leave 2 guys here just to pick up the power trowel. One guy can definitely power trowel and finish this floor by himself really easily with the experience that all my guys have. All 4 of us can. The only one that can is the guy bull floating right now, Luke, because he's brand new. Darren's kind of telling him what to watch out for, what to look for as he's pulling that back, making sure that back edge is tilted up a little bit, you know. And now he's going back down that edge, because when he picked the bull float up, it leaves like a funny little mark. The bull float kind of sticks to the surface of the concrete a little bit, so he's just smoothing that area out. Now you could also use your hand float, mag float, and do that too. But if you've got room to go all the way around the outside of the floor like this, it's just as easy to do it with a bull float as you're walking around it. So what Luke has to finish up now is just this little front area. You know, it's sometimes maybe having a little bit longer or a little bit wider bull float would make something like this go easier, but it goes pretty fast once you learn how to do it. Bull floating is probably one of the easier things to start to learn, and then once you get comfortable with it, get a little bit more confidence with it that you're not going to screw up the floor, you can go about at least twice as fast as what he's going to really reduce the amount of time it takes to do it. Yeah, you can see me over there now with my mag float. So I'm just taking that out. I smooth out the areas right in front of the garage doors, and then, you know, we let those areas set up a little bit just to get a little bit firm in front of where the doors are, and then we'll taper the concrete right where the garage doors are. So where the doors sit down, it kind of sits on a taper, and then no water can get in from the driveway up under the door onto the slab, because that sits on a little bit lower taper there. But we don't like the lip. Some guys will cut a lip into that, you know, 1 inch deep or 2 inches deep, and then the door will sit down in there. We don't like doing that. That's a trip edge. So we just taper that part, and that's always worked really good for us.
Alright, so that's going to do it for this. 24-24. We had 10.5 yards. I think we used most of it. He doesn't have much left on there. It was pretty thick in the back. It was like 6.5 inches thick in the back. So it'll be, I don't know, it's probably like 7:30 in the morning right now. Probably at least an hour before the guys got to get on this and stop finishing. But it's supposed to be about 90 today. So this thing will probably be done around noon time, 1 o'clock. But the rest of us will probably leave one guy here. The rest of us are going to head up to a different town half an hour from here and finish setting up a stamp pool deck for tomorrow. So we'll see you on that.